The sterile gleam of polished marble reflected a scene of utter horror, a stark contrast to the opulence Arthur Miller usually found in the sterling Capitol Executive washroom. Tonight, there was no order, only chaos. A young man, barely more than a boy, lay convulsing, his expensive clothes a cruel mockery against his deathly pallor. Beside his trembling hand, a syringe glinted ominously under the harsh lights. For Arthur, a 62-year-old janitor whose life was a quiet tapestry of routine and unspoken sorrows, this single, terrifying discovery would not only demand every ounce of his courage, but would also unlock a future he'd long ago stopped dreaming of, a reward so profound it would change everything. Arthur Miller was a man shaped by the quiet hum of late-night office buildings and a lingering scent of industrial cleaner. For 15 years, he'd been the night janitor at Sterling & Sterling, a ghost in the hallowed halls of high finance. His footsteps, muffled by worn-soled shoes, were often the only sound that echoed to the deserted corridors after the last ambitious executive had finally gone home. He was meticulous, almost reverent, in his work, wiping away the day's relentless pursuit of profit, preparing the stage for the next. His own life, however, was a stark counterpoint to the gleaming ambition he so carefully polished. A widower for 5 long, achingly silent years since his beloved Mary passed, Arthur's world had shrunk to his small, sparsely furnished apartment on the city's less glamorous side. The paint peeled in the corners, and the radiator often clanked in protest against the cold. But it was his. Meals were solitary, eaten from a chipped plate while watching old black-and-white movies, the flickering images a pale substitute for companionship. His greatest joy and deepest sorrow was a weekly bus journey to the quiet cemetery overlooking the city. There, he'd sit beside Mary's modest headstone, his voice a low murmur as he recounted the small events of his week. The wind carried his words away like whispered secrets. A profound weariness was etched into the lines around his eyes, a tiredness that went bone deep, born not just from decades of physical labor, but from the accumulated weight of loneliness and a grief that time had dulled but never erased. He found a strange comfort in the predictability of his nightly tasks. The rhythmic sweep of his broom, the slosh of water in his bucket, the satisfying swipe of his cloth across a dusty surface. These were small acts of order in a world that often felt too vast and indifferent. He knew the habits of the unseen daytime occupants by the traces they left behind. The half-eaten sandwiches, the nervously chewed pens, the occasional discarded note filled with frantic calculations or hopeful doodles. He was an invisible chronicler of their lives, their stresses, their fleeting triumphs. Mr. Alastair Sterling Sr.'s office, the CEO's inner sanctum, was always Arthur's last stop on the executive floor. It was a cavernous space, dominated by a massive mahogany desk and a panoramic window that drank in the glittering city skyline. Arthur dusted with extra care here. On the corner of the desk, nestled amongst important-looking documents bound in leather, stood a silver-framed photograph. It depicted a younger, softer-looking Mr. Sterling, an elegant woman Arthur presumed was his late wife, and a teenage boy with a shock of dark hair and a shy, intelligent smile. Arthur often paused at this photograph, a brief moment of connection with a life so different from his own. He'd often wonder about the boy, what kind of man he was becoming. Beneath Arthur's reserved exterior lay a wellspring of quiet kindness, dispensed in small, almost imperceptible ways. He'd sometimes leave an unopened packet of cookies, salvaged from forgotten conference room platter. On the desk of a young paralegal he'd noticed working especially late, her face pale with exhaustion. He'd ensure the struggling potted palm near the elevators, often overlooked by the day staff, received a discreet watering from his own carefully measured supply. These were tiny gestures, offered without expectation of thanks, small sparks of warmth in the sterile corporate environment. They were, perhaps, his way of keeping Mary's generous spirit alive in the world. Tonight, however, the usual deep stillness of the 30th floor felt different, charged with an unsettling tension. It was well past 2 a.m. on a Friday, an hour when the building usually sighed into profound slumber. Arthur was pushing his mop bucket towards the executive washroom, the one usually reserved for Mr. Sterling himself and rarely used this late. That's when he heard it. Not a mechanical hum or the settling of the building, but a distinct, muffled thud, followed by a gasp. Sharp, desperate, and horrifyingly human. Arthur's heart, a steady, reliable organ, suddenly hammered against his ribs. He stopped, his mop clattering softly as he leaned against the wall. The executive washroom door was slightly ajar, a sliver of harsh light spilling into the dim corridor. This was wrong, terribly wrong. A prickle of unease, then outright alarm, spread through him. He was just a janitor. His job was to clean, to be unseen. But that sound, it was a plea for help that transcended job descriptions. Taking a shallow, unsteady breath, he nudged the heavy oak door further open with his fingertips. The sight that slammed into him stole the air from his lungs. There, sprawled on the cold, pristine marble floor, amidst the gleaming chrome fixtures and opulent stonework, was a young man. His limbs were jerking in violent, uncontrolled spasms. His face, chalky white and slick with a horrifying sheen of sweat, was contorted in agony. His expensive shirt was rucked up, one designer sneaker kicked off haphazardly. And there, almost touching his outstretched, trembling fingers, lay a small, empty syringe, its needle glinting malevolently. Arthur's mind struggled to process the scene. This was a spilled coffee or an overflowing waste bin. This was a life teetering on the precipice, right here in the heart of corporate power. Then, through the haze of shock, a jolt of recognition. The boy's features, though twisted in distress, were undeniably familiar. It was the boy from the photograph on Mr. Sterling's desk. Older now, perhaps 18 or 19, the innocent smile replaced by lines of suffering, but it was him. Ethan. He'd heard the name once, mentioned in passing by a secretary. Mr. Sterling's son. For a critical second, Arthur felt rooted to the spot, an icy wave of panic washing over him. His first aid training was a distant memory, a half-forgotten course from years ago, focused more on minor workplace accidents than life-threatening emergencies. He was just a janitor. What could he possibly do? He looked around, a wild hope that someone else might appear, but the floor was utterly deserted. He shouted, "Help! Is anyone there? Somebody help!" His voice, thin and reedy, was swallowed by the echoing silence of the vast, empty floor. He was utterly alone with the dying boy. Then something snapped within him. The image of Mary's kind face, her unwavering belief in doing the right thing, flashed through his mind. He couldn't just stand there. He knelt, his old knees protesting with a sharp crack, beside Ethan's thrashing body. He forced himself to recall the faded instructions from that first aid course. Airway, breathing, circulation. With hands that trembled but found an unexpected steadiness, he gently tilted Ethan's head back, tried to ensure his tongue wasn't blocking his breathing. The convulsions were terrifying, but he focused. Then, carefully, he maneuvered the boy onto his side, into the recovered position, his movement surprisingly deft for a man of his age and weariness. The syringe lay there, a stark, ugly accusation. Arthur's heart clenched, not with judgment, but with a sudden, overwhelming surge of paternal empathy. This was someone's child. This boy was in desperate trouble. His own phone, an ancient flip model that was more relic than technology, felt like a lead weight in his shaking hand. He fumbled it open, his callous fingers thick and clumsy as he punched in the emergency number. When the operator's calm, professional voice answered, Arthur struggled to keep his own from cracking. Sterling and Sterling Capital, 30th floor, executive men's room. He swallowed hard. A young man, he's unconscious, convulsing. I think, I think it's an overdose. He forced himself to give the address clearly, to repeat the floor number, his voice hoarse with urgency. After ending the call, he turned back to Ethan. The boy's violent tremors were beginning to subside, replaced by shallow, ragged breaths that hitched in his chest. His eyes were half-lidded, vacant, staring at nothing. A chilling sight. Arthur leaned closer, his weathered face just inches from Ethan's. "Hang on, son," he murmured, his voice rough but infused with a desperate gentleness. "Help is on its way. You just hang on now. You're not alone, you hear me? You're not alone." He reached into his trouser pocket and pulled out his handkerchief, old, frayed at the edges, but always meticulously clean. He used it to tenderly wipe the sweat and spittle from Ethan's clammy forehead and lips. He remained there, kneeling on the cold, unforgiving marble, one hand resting lightly on Ethan's shoulder, a silent, steadfast vigil. He kept murmuring quiet words of encouragement, simple phrases he wasn't sure Ethan could even register, but he couldn't bear the silence. He monitored the boy's breathing, each shallow intake a small victory, his own heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The minutes stretched, each one an agonizing eternity. Finally, the distant, rising wail of sirens pierced the night, growing louder, closer, until the urgent thud of heavy boots echoed in the corridor outside. 2 paramedics burst into the washroom, their movements swift, focused, their faces serious. Arthur, trembling with a mixture of relief and residual shock, quickly explained what he'd found, what little he'd been able to do. He pointed a shaky finger towards a discarded syringe. They worked with practiced efficiency, barking medical terms at each other, attaching monitors, administering something via and for. As they carefully lifted Ethan onto a gurney, one of the paramedics, a young woman with tired but kind eyes, paused and looked at Arthur. "You did good, sir," she said, her voice sincere. "Calling us immediately, putting him in the recovery position, you very likely saved his life." Then, just as quickly, they were gone, rushing Ethan toward the elevators, toward the hospital, towards a chance, leaving Arthur alone in the suddenly stark and sterile bathroom, the lingering scent of fear mixing with the usual disinfectant. Police officers arrived shortly after, their questions polite but firm, their expressions unreadable. Arthur, still shaky but composed, recounted the night's events for a second time, his voice low and steady, omitting no detail. He felt profound exhaustion settle over him, a weariness that went far beyond his usual end-of-shift fatigue. When he finally punched out and stepped out of the silent skyscraper, the first pale, tentative fingers of dawn were streaking the eastern sky, painting the city in hues of gray and fragile hope. He wondered if Ethan Sterling would see another sunrise. The following Saturday was a torment of anxious waiting for Arthur. He replayed the scene in the opulent bathroom over and over in his mind. Ethan's ghastly pallor, the desperate fight for breath, the chilling glint of the syringe. A persistent knot of worry tightened in his stomach. Was the boy all right? Would he survive? He almost called the local hospitals, but he didn't know the full family name for inquiries. Only Sterling, and the thought of intruding felt wrong. He spent his Sunday at Mary's graveside, the familiar comfort of their one-sided conversations replaced by a troubled, prayerful silence. He spoke of Ethan, of the fear in the boy's eyes, and of his own desperate hope. Monday morning arrived with a leaden sense of apprehension. Arthur clocked in for his late shift, bracing himself for the inevitable fallout. News of such a dramatic incident on the executive floor would surely have circulated, whispered in hushed tones over cubicle walls and coffee machines. He half expected to be met with suspicion, perhaps even accusations. As he slowly prepared his cleaning cart, arranging his bottles and cloths with meticulous care, his supervisor, Dave, a perpetually harried man with tired eyes, approached him. "Arthur," Dave said, his voice unusually subdued, Mr. Sterling Sr. wants to see you. In his office. Right now. Arthur's heart plummeted. This was it. He nodded mutely, his palms suddenly damp. He followed Dave to the now bustling office. The normal Monday morning cacophony of ringing phones and urgent conversations feeling alien and deafening. When he was ushered into Mr. Alistair Sterling's vast office, the CEO was standing with his back to the room, gazing out of the floor-to-ceiling window at the sprawling city below. He looked smaller. The formidable, almost intimidating aura that usually radiated from him was gone, replaced by an almost visible shroud of exhaustion and profound worry. He seemed to have aged 10 years in a single weekend. When Mr. Sterling finally turned, his eyes, usually so sharp and piercingly intelligent, were shadowed, bloodshot, and filled with a raw, haunted look. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice low, gravelly, as if he'd been shouting or crying for hours. "Please sit down." Arthur perched uneasily on the very edge of an incredibly expensive leather armchair, his worn work uniform feeling conspicuously out of place amidst the polished mahogany and curated art. "Tell me," Mr. Sterling said, his gaze locking onto Arthur's, unwavering and intense. "Tell me everything that happened Friday night." Arthur, though his nerves were frayed, found a core calm. He recounted the events, just as he had to the police. He spoke simply, factually, without embellishment or drama. He described finding Ethan, the state he was in, the call to emergency services, the agonizing wait. He didn't mention his own fear, or the way his heart had pounded, only his actions. He spoke of gently wiping Ethan's face. Mr. Sterling listened without interruption, his stern, powerful facade slowly, visibly crumbling as Arthur spoke. His hands were clasped together on his desk, so tightly that his knuckles were white. Occasionally, a muscle twitched in his jaw. When Arthur finished, a heavy, suffocating silence filled the opulent room. Then Mr. Sterling's broad shoulders sagged, as if an immense weight had finally crushed him. "Ethan, he's my son," he stated, the words thick, cracking with unshed emotion. He's been struggling, Mr. Miller, terribly. His mother, my ex-wife, she passed away from cancer just 6 months ago. It devastated him, far more than I ever allowed myself to see." Arthur looked at the titan of industry, this man who commanded fortunes and influenced markets, and for the first time he saw not the powerful CEO, but simply a father broken by fear, grappling with a grief that, in its own way, mirrored Arthur's own profound loss. The immense chasm between their stations in life seemed to dissolve in that moment, bridged by the shared, universal agony of love and fear for a child. "I understand loss, sir," Arthur said quietly, his voice imbued with an empathy that clearly resonated with the distraught man before him. "It carves a deep hole, one that never truly fills." Mr. Sterling nodded slowly, a flicker of surprise, then understanding, in his weary eyes. This quiet, unassuming janitor saw his pain. Ethan is going to be okay," the CEO continued, a distinct tremor in his voice now. "The doctors at the hospital said if you hadn't found him precisely when you did, if you hadn't acted so quickly, so decisively." He trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. He swallowed, then looked directly at Arthur, his eyes raw with gratitude, so profound it was almost painful to witness. "You saved my son's life, Mr. Miller. You gave him back to me." The words, so simple, yet so immense, hung between them. Arthur, a man of few words and deep humility, could only nod, a lump forming in his throat. He hadn't sought thanks, hadn't even considered it. He had simply done what any decent human being should do. But hearing it from this powerful, now vulnerable man, understanding the terrifying depth of his relief, touched Arthur profoundly, an unexpected, fragile connection had been forged in the cold, sterile confines of that bathroom, a bond between two fathers, one who had nearly lost everything, and one who had quietly, steadfastly done the right thing. In that moment, Alistair Sterling no longer saw a janitor. He saw the man who had returned his son from the brink of death. The subsequent weeks were a period of quiet adjustment within the usually frenetic Sterling and Sterling offices. Whispers about Ethan Sterling's serious health scare gradually subsided, replaced by the usual hum of business. Arthur continued his nightly routines, the echo of that terrible night still resonating within him. He felt a strange blend of profound relief for Ethan and a lingering, gentle anxiety for the boy's future. Then, about 3 weeks after that fateful night, as Arthur was meticulously polishing the brass plaque outside the boardroom, Mr. Sterling approached him. His demeanor was calmer now. The haunted look in his eyes lessened, though a new gravity remained. "Arthur," he said, his voice steady, respectful, "Ethan is home from the hospital. He's doing much better. He's on the road to recovery. He specifically asked if he could see you. He wants to thank you himself. Would you be willing to meet with him?" A warmth, unexpected and comforting, spread through Arthur's chest. "Of course, Mrs. Sterling," he replied, his voice soft. "I'd be very glad to see him." The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon, a couple of hours before Arthur's shift was due to begin. He arrived at Mr. Sterling's office dressed in his best, though still well-worn off-duty clothes, a neatly pressed shirt and clean trousers. He felt a little self-conscious. Ethan was there, sitting in one of the plush armchairs beside his father. He looked thinner than Arthur remembered from the photograph, and much paler, but his eyes, though still carrying the shadow of his recent ordeal, were clearer, more alert. He looked up as Arthur entered, a complex mix of emotions, shame, then relief, then a dawning gratitude, flitting across his young face. The initial moments were filled with a slightly awkward silence. Ethan fidgeted, his gaze mostly fixed on the expensive carpet. Arthur, sensing the boy's discomfort and his own unease, offered a gentle, reassuring smile. "It's truly good to see you looking so much better, young man," he said, his voice calm and kind, breaking the ice. Ethan finally lifted his eyes and met Arthur's gaze. "Thank you, Mr. Miller," he mumbled, his voice still a little weak but sincere. For everything you did. I owe you my life." Mr. Sterling placed a supportive hand on his son's shoulder, his expression one of deep paternal love and relief. Then he turned to Arthur, his own face etched with profound sincerity. "Arthur," he began, his voice resonating with emotion, "what you did, there are no words, no actions that can ever truly express the depth of our gratitude. You were a beacon in an unimaginable storm. But I want to offer you something more than just words, something tangible to reflect the immense gift you've given us." He paused, taking a deep, deliberate breath. "You've been a loyal, diligent, and incredibly trustworthy part of this company for 15 years, Arthur. Always reliable, always thorough. Perhaps largely unseen by many, but not unvalued, and certainly not by me, especially now." He gestured toward a folder on his immaculate desk. I want to ensure your own future is secure, that you can live your remaining years with the dignity and peace you so richly deserve. We've taken the liberty of looking into your circumstances, very discreetly, of course. I hope you don't mind." Arthur felt a warm flush creep up his neck. His modest life, his small but persistent debts, his non-existent savings for retirement. He'd always guarded such personal matters fiercely. Mr. Sterling continued, his voice gentle but firm. "We've established a substantial pension fund in your name, Arthur. It's more than enough for you to retire comfortably immediately, if that is your wish. Furthermore, any outstanding debts you may have will be completely clear by the company. And," he hesitated, a more personal, almost tender note entering his voice. My late wife, Ethan's mother. She always dreamed of retiring to a small cottage by the sea, a place with a garden where she could grow roses. I recall you mentioning once, a long time ago, to my secretary, that your own dear Mary also loved gardening. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. He had mentioned it, once years ago, a fleeting comment about Mary's wish for a little patch of earth. We found such a place, Arthur, Mr. Sterling said, his eyes holding Arthur's. A modest but truly lovely little house, not far from the coast, with a beautiful, established garden. It's yours. The deed is in this folder. No mortgage, no liens, no strings attached whatsoever. It is a gift from our family to you. Arthur stared, utterly dumbfounded, his mind reeling. This wasn't just a generous bonus or a handshake. This was a complete transformation of his existence. A full pension, his debts erased, a home with a garden. The very dream Mary had cherished, a dream they'd never dared to believe could come true. It was too much. The quiet, stoic dignity he had worn like a protective cloak for so many years was suddenly overwhelmed by a tidal wave of emotion he couldn't possibly suppress. Mr. Sterling, Ethan, Arthur began, his voice thick, strangled by unshed tears. His vision blurred as tears welled in his eyes, clouding the image of the powerful CEO and his recovering son. He, Arthur Miller, the invisible janitor, the man who moved through life like a shadow, was being seen, truly seen, acknowledged in a way he hadn't experienced in decades, perhaps ever. I don't know what to say. I just did what I thought was right, what anyone would have done. Mr. Sterling shook his head, a faint, sad smile gracing his lips. No, Arthur, not everyone. Many would have hesitated. Many would have been too scared, or would have walked away, or worse, judged. You stayed. You acted with incredible courage, with profound compassion, and with a clear head in a crisis. You didn't see a problem to be avoided. You saw a human being in desperate need. You didn't just clean up messes. Arthur, you saved a precious life. You saved my son. And in doing so, you saved a part of me I thought I'd lost. Ethan, witnessing Arthur's genuine, overwhelming emotion, and perhaps deeply moved by his father's heartfelt words, found his own voice, stronger this time, clearer. He's right, Mr. Miller, he said, looking directly at Arthur, his young gaze steady and filled with an earnestness that was deeply touching. When I was sort of in and out of it, before the paramedics arrived, I remember seeing your face above me. You didn't look disgusted or angry or scared even. You just looked kind, so incredibly kind. You talked to me. You didn't treat me like I was some piece of trash. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for not giving up on me when I had almost given up on myself. The raw, unvarnished honesty in the boy's voice struck Arthur to his very core. He reached out, an almost instinctive gesture, and placed a gentle, callous hand on Ethan's arm. Son, he said, his voice now raspy with his own deeply felt emotion, everyone deserves a helping hand when they stumble and fall. Everyone deserves kindness, no matter what. Life can be incredibly hard, and sometimes we lose our way in the darkness. The most important thing, the bravest thing, is to find the path back to the light. He thought of Mary, of his own long, lonely struggles, of the quiet, unseen battles that everyone fights. You're young. You have a whole, precious life ahead of you. Don't let this one dark chapter define you. Let it be a profound lesson, a terribly hard one, yes, but one that ultimately makes you stronger, more compassionate. Alistair Sterling watched the exchange between the elderly janitor and his son, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. The formidable CEO facade had completely dissolved, replaced by the vulnerable, overwhelming relief of a father who had been to the precipice of unimaginable loss and had been granted a second chance. "Arthur," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "you've given us far more than you can possibly comprehend. Not just Ethan's life, which is everything, but a chance for us, for our family, to truly heal, to reconnect. This whole horrific ordeal, it was a brutal, terrifying wake-up call for me. I was so consumed by all of this," he gestured vaguely around the opulent, silent office, "that I failed to see how much my own son was hurting, how lost he was." The three of them sat there for a long, poignant moment, the silence no longer awkward or strained, but filled with profound, shared humanity. The imposing office, usually a symbol of relentless ambition and cutthroat corporate power, had transformed into an unexpected sanctuary of vulnerability, boundless gratitude, and genuine human connection. The janitor who had walked unseen for so long, the CEO who commanded empires, and a boy who had tragically lost his way, all brought together by a moment of profound crisis, and now inextricably bound by an act of simple, unhesitating kindness. A significant weight, one Arthur hadn't even realized he'd been carrying for years, seemed to lift from his shoulders, replaced by a warmth that spread through his entire being, a gentle, pervasive warmth he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a very, very long time. Arthur, after much gentle but firm persuasion from profoundly grateful Mr. Sterling and a quietly insistent Ethan, eventually, tearfully, accepted the almost unbelievable gifts. It felt surreal at first, alien, to wake up each morning without the familiar, oppressive weight of financial worry pressing down on him. The small, charming cottage by the sea was more beautiful, more peaceful than he could have ever dared to dream. It had a little garden out back, sun-drenched and fragrant with a scent of salt air and blooming flowers, just waiting for his touch. He'd spend hours there, his hands in the rich soil, and often he'd imagine Mary beside him, her face alight with joy, her laughter mingling with the cry of the gulls. The thought brought a bittersweet ache, but also a profound, healing sense of peace. He didn't entirely stop working, not right away. The habits of a lifetime, the need to be useful, were deeply ingrained. He began volunteering at a local community center a few days a week, helping with odd jobs, tending their small vegetable patch, and sometimes just sitting and talking with the elderly folks or mentoring some of the younger kids who reminded him just a little of a lost and vulnerable Ethan. He found a new, quiet joy in these small acts of service, in feeling a part of something, in connecting with people in a way his old life hadn't allowed. Ethan, with the unwavering support of his father, who was now more present and attentive than ever before, and deeply inspired by Arthur's non-judgmental compassion during his darkest hour, bravely continued on his difficult path to recovery. The near-fatal incident became not an ending, but a stark, transformative turning point, a harsh but ultimately necessary catalyst for profound change in his life. He and his father, Alistair, slowly, carefully, rebuilt their fractured relationship, discovering a new depth of understanding, forgiveness, and love for one another. Mr. Sterling, forever changed by the experience, became a more empathetic leader, a more present father. He even initiated new, robust programs at Sterling and Sterling Capital, focused on employee well-being, mental health support, and anonymous crisis intervention, a quiet, lasting tribute to the lessons he'd learned from a humble janitor at his own son's brush with death. And so, the story of the exhausted janitor who saved the CEO's son became a quiet, cherished legend within the towering walls of the firm, and a poignant, uplifting testament to the extraordinary, often unseen power of ordinary kindness. Arthur Miller, the man who had spent most of his life in the shadows, accustomed to being invisible, had, in one critical moment of clear-headed bravery and simple human decency, stepped decisively into the light. His single compassionate act had rippled outwards, transforming not just his own life beyond all recognition, but the lives of an entire family, and subtly, yet significantly, shifting the culture of a powerful corporation toward a greater humanity. It served as a beautiful, enduring reminder that true worth isn't measured by job titles or the figures in a bank account, but by the quiet strength, the unwavering courage, and the boundless compassion held within a human heart. A humble, overlooked hero had finally received his well-earned reward, and in doing so, had illuminated for everyone the enduring, life-changing magic of simply choosing to care.